Welcome to Philosophy15. I'm Scott Aikin.
I'm Robert Talisse.
We're two philosophy professors talking about philosophical ideas, things that are coming to our mind, things that we've been thinking about, 15 minutes at a time, unscripted. We're the authors of Pragmatism, Pluralism, and the Nature of Philosophy, and Why We Argue and How We Should, now in second edition from Routledge. This is the second edition of our conversation about the moral demands of democratic citizenship. In the last episode, Rob had set up the problem being a kind of a conflict between us feeling like we're constrained by the results of democratic processes and the kinds of moral commitments that we've got. That it looks like we have to, in some ways, make significant compromises in order for that to be manifested. Rob, can you sort of lay out exactly how that problem is set up?
Sure. So it looks like the stance that is required of the citizen in a democracy both is demanding because it requires that I have to acknowledge that my fellow citizens are my political equals, even when I assess their political views as misguided, uninformed, ignorant, and even within a spectrum, unjust.
Sounds familiar.
Good. I have to also, still on the demanding side, recognize that there are certain conditions under which it is right for the government to enact policies on the basis of the political will of those very people who I assess as agents of injustice. Now, this looks like this demanding conflicted moral stance is not only demanding, it looks like it occasions a kind of moral dilemma in us.
Yeah.
My job as a democratic citizen is to stand up for justice.
Yeah.
My job as a democratic citizen is also to recognize that under certain conditions, the political will of those who are on the unjust side nonetheless gets to prevail. And so it seems as if that in certain kinds of maybe high-stakes cases or pressing cases, it looks as if the moral demand of democratic citizenship manifests as the demand to be complicit in a certain kind of injustice. It looks like an attack on one's moral integrity.
That's right. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's another way to kind of maybe manage this conflict with a distinction that's a familiar one with anyone who's been thinking about justice or a fairness or anything like that, which is a distinction between procedural justice and substantive justice. That we've got a substantive, you might call it end state, or a kind of the thing that we think of whenever we think of justice, versus you might say just procedures, and that we say, look, the results are just because it was the product of a just arrangement or a kind of a just process that produced it. So one way to, and again, maybe it's a kind of a false synthesis as we had kind of talked before, but it is a way of kind of maintaining that double vision that we can keep with our democracies, saying, look, I've got a substantive view of justice, but I've also committed to a kind of procedural view of the justice of my arrangement. Is that a way of being able to manage that situation, or at the very least maybe blunting the edge of the knife there on us?
Well, I mean, sure, it's certainly proposed as a way of managing this kind of tension, we might say. Yeah. And I suspect that in a lot of cases of political decision, it might be fully able, that sort of procedure-substance distinction might be fully able to kind of counterbalance or to eliminate or alleviate the burden, right? However, right, because remember, democracy is not requiring me, like Rousseau does, to embrace the democratic outcome.
That's right.
I only have to say the democratic outcome is the one that is proper to enact despite its substantive flaws.
Right.
Now, that's an easy thing to say when you think that the substantive status of the prevailing
came out right.
Well, it came out right, but also if you think it's merely flawed, right? If you think that what the democracy has decided is kind of just suboptimal, right? It's kind of easy to make that procedure-substance distinction work.
Right.
If on the other hand, if you think that the matter that had been decided incorrectly is momentous. Right, is a matter of, something really important, people's dignity, people's autonomy, people's liberty, their health, their security. Democracy produces the wrong result in that case. It looks as if now we wonder, what is the value of the procedure?
Now it's a dubious moral proposal.
That's right.
Yes.
Now it looks like, well, okay, so some procedure produced this,
right.
Morally horrific outcome, and that's supposed to do what? That's supposed to somehow make me okay.
I'm bound by that now?
Right.
Yeah.
You might even say that, look, what's the justification for that particular procedure? And given the substantive, horrific failure it's just resulted in. So it's a way of mitigating or blunting the dilemma, but I don't think it's a way of dealing with it in high stakes cases.
Doesn't solve the because there is a sort of another other element to it, which is, but whenever it comes out in your favor, those who you opposed are still bound by it too. They still have to live by the law that whenever your view wins, they're bound by it too. So that procedural one that just says something like, in some ways it's a kind of the justification is, you win some, you lose some. And the pushback is, but some losses are much harder to take than others. And, and you win some, you lose some. You're like, but I win the ones that don't that doesn't burn them quite as much, or at the very least, it doesn't feel like it's quite as big a victory whenever I win as whenever the loss is when I lose.
Right, and so we have to admit, at the limits, there are going to be, on any version of this sort of procedure-substance distinction, there are going to be substantive failures of a kind of such a gravity that are going to call into question the justness of the procedure.
Yeah.
Right, and we don't yet have a good moral account of what, how bad does the outcome have to be before we start thinking that the procedure is foul, right? We don't yet have an account of that,
right?
And we're
and we are fallible human beings, and so we have to be kind of resigned to that also. So
right,
okay.
So I think that there's limited value in the procedure substance distinction.
Okay.
Here's one way, though, that I think that we might start thinking about this kind of dilemma and this burden. It's just to note that the stance of the democratic citizen with respect to his fellow citizens that he assesses as promoters of injustice looks structurally analogous to the stance of religious toleration. And religious toleration is widely practiced. It's so familiar, so commonly practiced, so commonly regarded as obviously the correct moral stance for one to take with respect to alien religious conviction, that we don't commonly pause to think about how messed up a commitment it is. But it is structurally quite the same, right? The religious believer
says the thing that matters most is your relationship with God,
your salvation,
and then the sort of the results of that, which is salvation, right? Yeah,
and the religious believer, at least many of them, hold that there's no salvation outside of my particular faith community.
Some kind of exclusivism looks very plausible.
That's right.
Yeah.
And most religious believers hold some version of the thought that it's a religious duty, it's a religious obligation to assist others in achieving salvation.
Yeah, because that's the most important thing for them too. You're actually helping them.
That's right.
You're helping them to be better versions of them.
That's right. Nonetheless, the religiously tolerant believer thinks that it would be wrong, it would be unjust, it would be improper to force others to engage in the proper observances. It would be wrong and unjust for the state to criminalize or forbid certain kinds of heretical religious practices. And so you think that, okay, if salvation is the most important thing, if you've got a duty to help others achieve it, why in the world would you recognize any constraint on what you can do? It's the most important
thing that you can do.
In virtue of what other value is that
For you and for them.
constrained?
So-
right? Now, Locke gives I think the easy,
Okay,
but I
yeah.
think the ultimately terrible answer, right? Locke just says, well, we need to be religiously tolerant. Not a Catholics, by the way. We need to be religiously tolerant because forcing faith doesn't work. We're not cognitively the kinds of creatures. Conviction is not the kind of cognitive state that can be coerced. So the Lockean argument for religious toleration is that religious intolerance doesn't work.
Doesn't yield the goods that you think.
Yeah. So, but that's not the religious tolerance that we're interested in. Is the moral position that says that even if you could, it would still be wrong
bad
to do it. Right? Okay. Now, I think that what's at the center of that conception of religious toleration that makes this tension more bearable, or that helps us navigate the tension, is the underlying conception of conscience. That is, the religiously tolerant believer recognizes, even in the heretic, that religious conviction is, in some part, the product of the exercise of a human faculty, right? Conscience. And so even in the heretic, the religiously tolerant believer sees a quest, an endeavor, an aspiration that he recognizes in himself. Despite the grave philosophical and theological errors that the heretic is committed to, he nonetheless is exercising a faculty that the religiously orthodox is also exercising. Seeing in the religious other a common endeavor and aspiration is the key. Now note, that's it's natural to think that a person's attitude or stance with respect to a supremely important thing is that person's defining feature.
Yeah.
Religious toleration denies that.
Deny that.
Right? It's not the religious conviction that's the defining feature. It's the religious conviction understood as the exercise of a faculty that is the defining feature.
So this sounds very plausible in terms of the ways that we can then use this as a model, but also as a way of talking about why we have to nevertheless view others and protect others as political equals. Because all of the exercises of voice on the other side, the reason why we protect the exercise of voice on the other side of a vote is not just so that we can have it on the other side of it, it's so that we can protect the conscience of those on the other side. So here's one of the sort of the great ironies, was that whenever we at first said, hey, whenever you lose the vote, you get to keep your voice, but whenever they lose their vote, they get to keep their voice, and that looks like that's a bad thing. This is a way of reconceiving that and saying, you know what, it's a good thing on both sides. That's right.
And so to sort of repurpose a principle, sort of Kantian thought from Rawls that Rawls deploys in another kind of context. Rawls somewhere says in the Theory of Justice, the most important fact about us is not the ends that we choose, but our capacity to choose. Right? It's not our ends. It's not the way. It's not the shape of our life or the way that what our lives are committed to, or our conception of the good. It's our capacity to think through the issue of what makes a life successful. That's the most important thing about us, at least from the point of view, Rawls thinks, of thinking through justice for the basic structure of society, yada, yada, yada. Something similar is at work here. It's like, it's not, in now thinking particularly in the political case, in the analog with the religiously tolerant believer, democratic citizenship involves the moral requirement that I recognize that my fellow citizens are my equals, entitled to an equal say, and yet are not defined by their partisan affiliation or by their political projects. That affiliation, those projects have to be seen by me as the products of
some faculty
more
profound about them.
Yeah, good. Something which
So,
now
how are we able to see that in others?
good.
Because all I feel like I can see is just their political views. I can't see I can't see that function.
Good. So,
New philosophical problem.
yeah, good. This brings me to the theme of my recent book, Overdoing Democracy, which just addresses this very problem. We need to find things to do together in which our partisan allegiances are not suppressed or are not mitigated, and some of them are just irrelevant. There have to be social venues for cooperative endeavor in which our partisan affiliations are simply beside the point, so that we can see our fellow citizens as something more than merely citizens. In seeing them as something more than merely citizens, perhaps paradoxically, we become more able to treat them as we must, as fellow citizens. Philosophy 15, folks. See you next time.